All righty, let's get to it. Let's get to it. Happy Monday. I'm glad to see that everybody's feeling well tonight. We're about to get this show on the road, and I would like to start it off with a question. And this is a question. Have you ever found yourself repeating scenes of life over and over? Maybe you've experienced the same financial situation, same financial problems over and over, like you get money and you lose money. Um, Maybe you've experienced like some relational stuff. Like for some reason, you keep ending up with the same type of person. Like the name change, but the person, the character, the nature of the person is the same. Not even just intimate relationships, even business relationships. Have you just ever found yourself in a similar situation or similar predicament as you once were before? Drop a 777 in the chat if you've experienced a repeating scene of life over and over and over. And maybe you haven't come to the answer as to why that may be. That's what we're going to discuss on tonight's call. And so I'm going to put it to you like this. It may be because you're in something known as a cycle. See, a cycle can be defined as a series of events or a pattern that repeats itself over time. And so the thing about patterns is this: patterns can either reveal God's promises because embedded in every pattern is a principle, and these principles lead to us being revealed to a promise of God. As you begin to look through scriptures, you can realize that. But patterns also reveal problems. So patterns can reveal promises, and patterns can also reveal problems. So we're talking about cycles tonight. A cycle can be defined as a series of events or a pattern that repeats itself over time. So the reason why we experience the same lives and we repeat these same occurrences over and over and over again, it could be very well because we're in a cycle, and this cycle is evident because of a pattern. And so, all throughout the Bible, primarily in the Old Testament, we can see God's chosen people finding themselves in cycles. So, emphasis on God's chosen people. Why is it emphasis on that? Because I need you to understand that cycles, they're impartial. Cycles, everybody is going to experience them over the course of life, but not everybody stays in them. See, it's cool to experience the cycle sometimes because we're going to talk about it in a second, but cycles, they allow you to learn in a sense because you only have to repeat cycles when you haven't learned something. So cycles do give you a level of learning. But some people stay in cycles longer than they have to. Some people stay in bad or negative seasons longer than they have to. So cycles are impartial because everybody experiences them, but not everybody stays in them for a long amount of time. But here's what you also got to understand about cycles. All cycles are not bad. All cycles are not bad. See, the cycle that you're in, the goodness or the bad of it depends on what type of cycle that you're in, but they all aren't bad. So you have the cycle of success and the cycle of self-sabotaging behavior. The cycle of success and the cycle of self-sabotaging behavior. Now, here's what's interesting about both of these cycles, the cycle of success and the cycle of self-sabotaging behavior. They're created the same exact way. The cycle of success and the cycle of self-sabotaging behavior, they're created the same exact way. And they're created in the way in which we discussed last week when we talked about beliefs. That was the topic of last week's discussion. If you missed it, double back and go check out the recording on my channel. But everything is born, everything is it starts with your belief system. So a cycle, whether it's a self-sabotaging cycle or a cycle that's rooted in success, everything starts with the way in which you believe. Because your beliefs lead to your thinking, how you think. The way in which you think determines the emotions that you feel. The emotions that you feel determines the action or the lack of action that you choose to take. The action that you choose to take determines your results. And those results that you get reinforce your belief, reinforce your identity. or they reinforce this cycle. So when we're talking about living a repeat life over and over and experiencing these same things over and over, it has everything to do in which the way in which we believe, because the belief creates a thought process. A thought process can also be likened to a pattern of thought, a repeating thought process, which creates these repeated emotions, which creates this repeated action, which gets these repeated results, the same results over and over and over again, hinting the term cycles. So again, God's chosen people, the Israelites, they experience cycles all throughout the Bible. So primarily in the Old Testament, we can see clear as day what it looks like to go through cycles. God frees his chosen people out of Egyptian captivity as slaves, and he takes them into the wilderness to lead them into the promised land. But in this journey that should have only taken 11 days, it wound up taking 40 years because they kept finding themselves in cycles. They kept finding themselves in a place of disobedience, which led to complaining. So they disobeyed God. Then they complained about the process that God had them in, which led to them wandering in the wilderness, which then led to them being delayed to get to the place that God had for them. But it started with disobedience, which led to the complaining, which led to the wilderness or the wandering, which then ultimately led to the delay. But then as you continue to read, you realize that they found themselves in this other cycle, this other pattern, which then started with sin, which then led to oppression, which then led them to crying to God for help, which then led them to deliverance. God freed them from their oppressors. They beat the people that they were warring against, the Philistines, all these different people that they were warring against to experience the promised land that was already given to them. So disobedience, complaining, wandering led to delay. Then the sin led to oppression. The sin was idolatry. The sin was putting other things before God. This was their sin that again started this cycle. This sin of idolatry led to them being oppressed by their oppressors. This is why you see Gideon and Judges sifting wheat or doing something with wheat, with the wheat press underground when he should have been above, but he was so scared of his oppressors. His oppressors had him hiding, but they wouldn't have to hide if they weren't in sin, because they wouldn't have been oppressed, and they wouldn't have to then have cried for help to be delivered and then repeat this process again. So all throughout the Old Testament, we can see God's people, I'm getting somewhere, we can see God's people experiencing cycles over and over and over again. But here's the thing about a cycle. If you do not identify the source of a cycle, you are destined to repeat the cycle. If you fail to identify the source of the cycle that you may be in today, you're destined to repeat the cycle again tomorrow. So you have to identify the source of the cycle. It's one thing to recognize that you're in a cycle and see that this cycle is a real thing and experience life the same way over and over and over again. But it's another thing to understand why that is. Because if you don't identify the source of the cycle, you're destined to repeat it. So my question for you is, why do people experience cycles? Why do you think that is? Drop something in the chat. Let me know. Why do you think people experience cycles? Talk to me in the chat. No answer can be a wrong answer, obviously. So why do you think people experience cycles? Old habits. Okay, I see that. What else we got? Somebody talk to me. Give me something. Fear of change, same thing in life keeps happening over and over again. Haven't learned the lesson. All of that is correct. See, the reason why we experience cycles, in most cases, is it can be because of three different reasons. And there could be many more, but for the sake of this discussion that we're having tonight, we're going to kind of talk about three. And the first one is people experience cycles over and over and over again because there's something that they have not learned yet. So shout out to Jen for putting that in the chat. There's something that they have not learned yet. Here's what I want you to put in your notes. Something that you're not seeing could be costing you. Something that you're not seeing could be costing you. Something that you're not learning could be costing you. So we experience cycles in most cases because God has to keep taking us through this so we can pick up what he put down. Is this making sense? But if we're not paying attention, if we can't see what God is doing, it says in Proverbs that we stumble all over ourselves. We keep making the same mistake. We keep going through the same repeated process over and over and over because we have not picked up what God has put down. So something that I'm not seeing could be costing me. Something that I'm not learning could be costing me. It's what is it costing me? It's costing me time because I'm wasting time here in this cycle when I could be over there in purpose. So people experience cycles because there's something that they have not learned. It's something that they're not seeing. And when you haven't learned something and you haven't saw something, it's costing you something. It's costing you time. You're wasting time here when you could be over there in purpose. The only difference between here and there is a T, and the T represents time. So we experience cycles over and over and over again because there's something that we haven't learned. There's something that we haven't learned about ourselves. There's something that we haven't learned about the situation, but there could also be something that we have not learned about God. See, the Israelites, they experienced this cycle. They experienced this wilderness season over and over and over and over and over. Go read it in Exodus over and over and over again. Years, 40 years in the wilderness when it should have only taken them 11 days to get to the destination. Can we just pause for a second and just think about that? Man, it took 40 years when it only should have taken 11 days. But why would something take that long? It's because they were in this repeated process and God was trying to teach them something about themselves, but he was also trying to teach them something about him. That he's sovereign, he's supreme. See, they were in the wilderness worshiping fake gods and not locked into the goal and not locked into what God called them to do. And they're worshiping fake gods and false gods because they think this false God can provide for them in the wilderness better than the true only God actually could. So God had to teach them in the wilderness, like, no, it's me, I'm him. I'm the first him and I'm the only true him. That's what he was trying to teach them. So they didn't understand that. So they what should have taken 11 days took 40 years. So now my question for you is I wonder, not even a question, but I wonder, is there any hindrance in our life where, you know, it's taking us a bit too long to get somewhere because we're caught up in this cycle? And God's like, bro, you could have been there, but you've been stuck in this cycle. Because the enemy, he wants to keep you trapped in cycles. I'm getting ahead of myself, but I just got to go with the flow. He wants to keep you in cycles because if he keeps you in a cycle, how could you ever get into purpose? If you're stuck like Chuck in the back of a pickup truck, can't move in a cycle, how could you ever get to purpose? So many people experience cycles over and over and over again because it's something that they haven't learned, it's something they haven't picked up, it's something that they haven't saw. But another reason why people experience cycles, hold your breath, maybe because they haven't healed from past trauma. And there's emotional wounds that's causing them to act in a way that's keeping them stuck because they haven't healed from something. Now, there's a bunch of things that people could have not healed from that keep them there. But if that's you, if you felt that, then you have to identify what that is for you. Because the reason why people stay stuck and the reason why people stay in cycles is because they haven't healed from some type of trauma that they've experienced in their life. And so, because we've been talking about the Israelites, what was their trauma? Their trauma was that they were slaves for 400 years, knowing that they're God's chosen people, but somehow they're slaves. There's trauma that comes with being a slave. There's trauma that comes with being in prison. So, can you imagine generations of people experiencing all of this trauma? And then, in the blink of an eye, the snap of a finger, they're now propelled from bondage to now they're free. So God literally could not take them where he wanted to take them anyway, because there was something that he had to work out of them. Because just because they were out of Egypt does not mean that Egypt was out of them. Just because God has brought you from a place, that does not mean that that place is out of you. So sometimes you have to stay in the cycle until you heal from some past trauma, but you can't heal from something that you won't reveal. Because don't get it twisted, everybody's dealing with a little bit of trauma. But when we hear trauma, we think, we just think of something super intense. So while we're here, let's read the definition of trauma together so you can understand. The definition of trauma is this: a deeply distressing or disturbing experience. A deeply distressing or disturbing experience. So sometimes people stay in cycles over and over and over because they went through something that was deeply distressing or something that was very disturbing. And that deeply distressing, disturbing experience limits them here mentally. It keeps their wrists in chain, it keeps their feet bound. So they can't move, they stay stuck, all because they haven't healed. And again, you can't heal what you won't reveal. So if there's any trauma in your life, what's trauma? A deeply distressing or disturbing experience. If you haven't healed from that, how could you ever move on and live a whole life if there's wounds that have not been healed? So that's the second reason why people may stay stuck in cycles. But what's the third one? I think that this is the most important one. I think that this one here is the foundational reason to all of them, in a sense, kind of. And when I say it, you'll believe me. The third and final reason why I believe people stay stuck in cycles over and over and over, repeating the same lives over and over again, getting caught up in the same situations over and over again, going back to the same places, same people over and over and over again, is because they have not silenced the voice in their head. Wait a minute. They have not silenced the voice in their head. So here's my question for you. How many people speak to you every day in your mind? Have you analyzed and assessed who is it that's speaking to you? Because the enemy is so sly, he's so cunning, and so experienced because he's been here forever. Yeah, see, experience makes you a bit smart. So he's sly, he's cunning, and he's experienced because he's been here since basically since the beginning. And he's learned from messing up people's lives since the beginning, starting with Eve, that if he can just get somebody to think something differently, if he can get somebody to just question their purpose or question their thoughts, or if he can get them disbelieving one thing and believing something else, then he wins. So many people stay stuck in cycles because they haven't silenced the negative voice in their head. And they believe that this negative voice is their voice. They believe that the negative thoughts are their thoughts, but it's not. Those thoughts are injected by the enemy. And we have to have the ability to discern where these thoughts are coming from. So if I want to advance my life and get out of a repeating cycle of debt, lack, experiencing the same life over and over and over again, getting caught up in the same situations over and over. If I want to experience something outside of that, I have to silence the voice in my head that's making me believe. Listen, I have to silence the voice in my head that's making me believe that me being in this cycle is okay. I have to silence the voice in my head that makes me believe that living life like this is okay. I have to silence that voice, because if I don't silence that voice becomes dominant, and I'll believe that that voice is my voice. I'll believe that those thoughts are my thoughts. Remember, it says in Matthew that Satan came into the heart of Judas. to get him to betray Jesus. So it wasn't even Judas's own thought to betray Jesus. But the enemy's so slick and cunning, he made Judas believe that that was his thoughts. So Judas began to process this thoughts of betraying the Savior of the world. He began to process his thought all because of a belief. So belief, remember, the cycle of success and the cycle of self-sabotaging behavior are both created the same exact way. It starts with your beliefs. So if I believe that the thought that I have from the enemy is my thoughts, then I'll think in a different way. I'll feel a different way. I'll act in a different way. But if I believe that the thought from the enemy is not my thought, and I have the ability to discern and clip the thought, do away with the thought, that now creates a different level of thinking, which creates a different level of feelings, which creates different emotions and actions, in turn, giving me a different result, reinforcing a different belief system and reinforcing a different identity, moving me out of this cycle that I found myself to be in. So, in order to get out of a cycle, I have to learn why I'm in it. I have to learn, I have to pick up what God has been dropping down that's causing me to be in this repeated cycle and experiencing life the same way over and over again. I have to heal from some trauma if I've experienced some type of trauma. And again, everybody's experienced trauma. What's trauma? We just discussed it. A deeply distressing or disturbing experience. So anything that deeply stresses you out, that disturbs you, that's a level of trauma. And you have to know how to heal from trauma, because if not, you will carry wounds and you will bleed on people that didn't even cut you. Wait a minute. Let me say that again. If you don't heal from what hurt you, then you will bleed on who did not cut you. And you carry trauma into relationships, you carry it into business partnerships, you carry it in friendships, you carry it everywhere. It bleeds over into your children, all type of stuff. So you have to heal from past trauma. This allows you to get out of cycles. Then you have to silence the voice in your head. Here's why this is so important. If you don't properly identify the source of a cycle, you can never analyze and then correct the problem. And many people can never truly identify why they're in a cycle because the enemy keeps them blind to it. He keeps them ignorant to it. He wants to keep them in darkness because in darkness, this is where the enemy has the advantage. He wins in darkness. What is darkness? Ignorance. So he keeps people ignorant to the reason why the cycle is here. He keeps them blind to understanding or being able to see and discern why they're here. He makes them not even want to identify this reason as to why do I keep repeating this over and over and over again. They just feel like, oh, this is how life's supposed to be. This is how life is. But no, it's not supposed to be that way. God wants us to live in seasons, not cycles. Seasons change at an appointed time, but cycles change when we do. Seasons change at an appointed time. Cycles change when we do. So God wants us to live our lives in seasons, not cycles. But some bad seasons can become cycles, and we keep repeating this bad season over and over and over. Why would we do that? It's because we haven't learned something. We haven't healed from some trauma that came as a byproduct of this season. If we don't heal from this trauma in this season, we're going to carry it to our next season. Or they just simply haven't silenced this voice in their head that's making them stay stuck like Chuck in the back of a pickup truck. So if the enemy can keep you ignorant to the why behind your cycle, then he can keep you in your cycle. And if somebody lives their life in the cycle, how could they ever reach purpose? They can't. They can't. So, and here's the thing, the thoughts, not even the reality, but the thoughts of you doing exactly, listen, the thoughts of you doing exactly what you were created, called, and commissioned to do, and not what he wants you to do, he meaning the enemy. But the thought of you doing exactly what you were created, called, a commission to do, not what he wants you to do, this is a thought that he could care less about entertaining. Oh, the thought of you reaching purpose, it drives him crazy. It drives him nuts. The thought that God's creation is going to do exactly what it's supposed to do, not what he's manipulated them and influenced them to do. Oh, it drives him crazy. Oh, I can't keep them stuck here and they're going to keep moving. Oh, it drives them crazy. And so this is why he wants to keep people in cycles, because if he keeps you in a cycle and keep repeating your same life over and over, and you're not excited about going out there and jumping off the cliffs and meeting new people and connecting and doing all the things that you're supposed to do that lead you to the place that you're supposed to be in, if he can keep you there, he wins. So you can't walk into a new season until you're willing to break an old cycle. And cycles change. We get out of these cycles when we become more aware of what God is trying to reveal to us. And it's in our control, it's in our power to break whatever cycle that we may be in. Any cycle that has been passed down from family members genetically, we have the power to break it. But it first takes us becoming aware that we're in a cycle. Number one, that's the first component to this, becoming aware. I have to become aware that, man, I'm in a cycle. Why do I keep experiencing this over and over and over again? Why do I keep experiencing life as I once did over and over? Why can't I move? And just so I can know that I'm not talking to myself, again, we had a couple new people hop on the call. Drop a 777 in the chat if you've ever been in a place where you've experienced cycles. You just keep repeating stuff over and over. You're like, man, why do I keep going through this? Right, perfect. I had to make sure I wasn't by myself. So the first key to getting out of a cycle or breaking a cycle is becoming aware that, man, I'm in a cycle. I'm in a cycle. But how do I recognize that I'm in a cycle? I first have to recognize the pattern. You first have to recognize the pattern. Because again, patterns, they reveal stuff to us. Patterns reveal stuff to us. Patterns can reveal problems, or patterns can also reveal promises. Depends on what type of pattern you're looking at. Depends on what type of pattern that you're in. So you have to recognize the pattern. Now, recognizing the pattern requires discernment. It requires discernment. And discernment is the ability to recognize the pattern and then make an adjustment. Recognize the pattern and then make an adjustment. So for me to break myself out of a pattern, get out of a pattern, get out of self-sabotage behavior, stop repeating the same life over and over again, it takes me becoming aware that number one, I'm in a pattern. And number two, I have to recognize the pattern that I'm in. To recognize a pattern, it requires discernment. Discernment is the ability to recognize and then make an adjustments. And then the next piece is I have to identify triggers. I have to identify some type of triggers that make me spend more money, that keeps me in this pattern of being broke. Like I have to recognize this trigger, like what makes me want to go do this? Because it's the action or the lack thereof that ultimately keeps us in the pattern. So you have to identify the triggers. And then next, you have to identify the thought process following the trigger. So becoming aware, we're talking about breaking cycles. Becoming aware that, man, I'm in a cycle. Girl, I'm in a cycle. Then I recognize the pattern that is evidence of this cycle because a cycle is only created by a pattern. So I have to recognize the pattern. See, the Israelites' pattern was disobedience, complaining, wandering, which led to delay. Then they found themselves in another cycle. It was sin. Then they became oppressed by their oppressors. Then they would cry to God for help. God would deliver them. And then they would repeat the same process over and over again. So God's chosen people experience cycle after cycle for years. So it just lets us know if God's chosen people, his chosen generation, if they experience cycles and there's chosen ones, then this lets us know that cycles are not impartial and they come to everybody. But depending on how long you stay is depending on how you attack the cycle, how you choose to break the cycle. And so, number one, I have to recognize that I'm in a cycle. Then I have to recognize the pattern that's creating the cycle. I do that through my discernment. Then I have to identify the triggers that make me act in a certain way, make me move in a certain way. And then once I identify these triggers, this now creates a thought process, a pattern of thoughts. And now when I have this pattern of thought, I have to now discern where these thoughts are coming from. I have to discern where the thoughts are coming from because again, remember, the enemy, he's so sly, he's so cunning, he's so smooth. He'll have you thinking that his thoughts are your thoughts. And if you're thinking that his thoughts are your thoughts, how far are you gonna get? How far would you get as God's creation, thinking a thought from the enemy doesn't get you far at all. And he knows that. So if he can get you to believe that his thoughts are yours and you take ownership of these negative thoughts, this keeps you in a pattern of self-sabotaging behavior, self-sabotaging action. You can never get far. So you have to recognize the pattern, identify the triggers that make you move and act in a certain way. And then you have to, I just said it. It just slipped my mind. And I literally just said it. Oh, thought process. Recognize the thought process that follows. Because again, we talked about this before. The reason why people don't do stuff that they know they should be doing is because they don't feel like it. The reason why people do things that they should be doing or should not be doing is because they found a way to feel like it. But why does somebody feel like doing something? It's because of the thought process. It's because of the stories that they tell themselves. And so, again, if the enemy can inject thoughts into your mind, make you believe that they're your own thoughts, you play these thoughts in your mind liking to a movie. A movie is a storyline. This creates a certain level of feeling, emotions, vibrations. So this is why you have to pay attention to the thoughts following the trigger and identify who's playing the movie on your mind. Mhm. And then you have to replace the thoughts. You have to replace the thoughts. You have to replace the negative thoughts with thoughts that are good. Sounds very simple, but it's so hard to do because thinking is hard work. It takes work to think. I spoke about this last week, but to sit there and think about something in your mind when your mind thinks 60 to 70,000 thoughts every single day, to think about something requires a level of focus and intention. So it's easy to sit in a negative thought because the negative thought, again, there's evidence to support this negative thought. There's feelings to support this negative thoughts. It's hard. It takes work to shift from thinking something negative to shift to something positive. Because a lot of times to shift from nothing, to shift from something negative to something positive requires you to have some type of evidence to make you believe in this positive thought. But remember, your mind will adopt whatever mindset you choose to believe. So whatever mindset you choose to believe, your mind adopts that and takes it as its own. And then your mind will then seek out the evidence. So if I adopt the negative belief, your mind will easily find evidence. It's easy. But it's the same way for the other side. If you adopt the positive belief, your mind will seek out the evidence. But it takes you really adopting this belief and becoming one with this belief, because this is the only way that you can break yourself out of a cycle. You have to identify or recognize and become aware that I'm in a cycle. My life keeps looking like this because I'm in a cycle. And if I don't change me, I stay in this cycle because cycles change when we do. Seasons change at appointed times. God is saying, I'm going to move this person from one season to another. That's an appointed time, like winter, spring, summer, fall. They change at an appointed time every single year. Sometimes a little bit slower, sometimes a little bit faster, but guaranteed it's going to change. It's an appointed time. But a cycle just keeps repeating itself over and over and over until somebody breaks the cycle. But I can't break the cycle if I haven't identified that I'm in a cycle. And that takes self awareness to identify that I'm in a cycle. It takes honesty, vulnerability, and transparency with yourself to say out your mouth, like, dang, my life been like this. I've been in a cycle. Yep. And then you got to recognize the patterns that's keeping you in this cycle over and over and over. And then you have to pay attention or identify the triggers that make you feel a certain way, make you process things a certain way. And then you pay attention to the processing. You pay attention to how you're processing the thoughts, processing the emotions after you've been triggered. And I identify, and analyze, man, are these thoughts mine? Are these thoughts from God? Are these thoughts from my enemy? Because my enemy wants to keep me in a cycle. Because if he keeps me in the cycle, I can never get into purpose. So I have to identify where these thoughts are coming from. Because if I think on a wrong thought too long, I create a movie in my mind. I create a narrative in my mind. I create a story in my mind. And if the story is not correct, if the story is not accurate, then my emotions that I feel will not be accurate. My actions that I take will not be accurate because I'm acting off of the wrong story. I'm acting off of the wrong processing, the wrong thoughts. So I have to identify where these thoughts are coming from. Then I have to replace the negative thoughts with good thoughts. I have to replace the negative thoughts with thoughts that are positive. When I do that consistently over time and my mind sees that I'm serious about changing my thought process and getting out of this cycle, my mind will then start to find evidence that supports this new mindset. It begins to find evidence and adopt new beliefs, which creates new thinking patterns, because our lives look the way that it does because of a thinking pattern. Thinking patterns over and over and over and over create pathways, neural highways in our mind. And it's not until we change our thought process and change our thought patterns that we create and forge new highways in our mind, which gets us to new results, new emotions, new ways of feeling. We see new people, we see new opportunities, we see different things because our mind is using, or our mind is going down a different neural highway because we're forging a new pathway in our brain by changing the pattern of thoughts. We're not just sitting in negative thought, thinking on negative thought, replaying the same story. We're replacing that thoughts because we're trying to get ourselves out of a pattern. We're trying to change our life and break a cycle because we can't break a cycle, or we can't reach purpose if we stay in a cycle. And if we can't break a cycle if we have not first identified the reason why we are in one to begin with. And so, if you find yourself, or if you found yourself repeating life over and over and over again, experiencing the same life over and over again, running into the same financial situations over and over again, meeting the same people, same type of person, same template, same attitude over and over and over again, same business partners over and over and over again, it may be because you're in a cycle. Mhm. And cycles only change when we change. We don't just automatically move out of a cycle. It takes us breaking a cycle. It takes us changing. It takes us having a level of awareness, number one. It's the biggest thing. And so if I want to change my life, it starts with me changing how I think. But in order for me to change how I think, I have to change how I believe. And again, the cycle of self-sabotaging behavior and the cycle of success, because remember, all cycles are not bad. It depends on what type of cycle you're in. See, I want to be in the cycle of success consistently, where it's just constant success over and over and over again because I got the right beliefs. So I think the right thoughts consistently. I feel the right way. My emotions are in alignment with my thoughts. And then my action is a byproduct of how I feel. But how I feel is a byproduct of how I've been thinking. How I've been thinking is a byproduct of my belief. So if I want to change my results, I first have to change my belief. If I want to get out of the cycle, I've got to change my belief because you're in a cycle because of a belief. Beliefs are everything. Yep. So to create a new life or to create a new cycle, it first takes you breaking the old one. To move into a new season, you have to say goodbye to your old one. You have to say goodbye to old cycles. Because if you don't, you're going to keep repeating the same self sabotaging behavior over and over and over again. A cycle is defined as a series of events or a pattern that repeats itself over time. Over time. So they're impartial. Everybody experiences them. But the length in which somebody stays in a cycle is solely based on them, solely based on them. Cycles change or seasons change at an appointed time. Cycles change when we do. God wants us to live our life in seasons, not cycles. But he uses cycles to get us to become aware of things that we may have missed. He uses cycles to teach us. He uses cycles to heal us. And he also uses cycles to get us to learn how to silence the voice in our head. So when we enter our new season, we're not crippled by a past voice that wants to take us back. So if you don't identify the source of a cycle, you're destined to repeat it. So that's the call tonight, guys. I hope that each and every single one of you got value from that. I know how it feels to be in cycles. I know how it feels to see life repeat itself over and over and over again. I know how it feels to find myself in repeated financial ruin because I haven't picked up what God was trying to show me. I know exactly how it feels to find myself in situations that, man, why am I here again? How did I do this again? It's because of a cycle. And this cycle has everything to do with how we believe, what we believe, because it determines how we think and process. That determines our emotions and our feelings, which determines our actions, which lead to our results. So I hope you guys got value from the call tonight. As we do each and every single Monday, I'm gonna open it up real quick for any input, questions. If you got something you want to say real quick, feel free. But I'd love to hear from maybe one or two people, and then we'll wrap the call up tonight. So you guys should be able to unmute yourself. Somebody go ahead. Not all speak at once, though.